The fight is absolutely not over.
As one chapter closes,
The fight will not be over until no one is killed by police officers for no reason.
the fight for equality takes a new form,
I think overall, we can be better.
shining new light on histories buried.
Yeah, it's our original sin that continues to haunt us right to this day.
Hidden
It is sort of a race against time to get those memories, those stories.
and erased.
It's still like this black hole that exists out there.
After decades of silence, communities now finding their voice.
What they want is to let their parents know it is okay to speak up.
And taking the first steps.
I will say in your lifetime, the work will not be done.
Good evening and welcome to a special edition of King 5 News. I'm Natalie Swaby. Over the last year, King 5 has done something few other local stations in the country have. We created a team dedicated entirely to reporting on race and equity. We call it Facing Race. It grew out of the global unrest that ignited after the killing of George Floyd in May of 2020. 2021 has been a turning point. The year that Derek Chauvin, the officer who killed Floyd, was jailed. The year that the men who killed Ahmaud Arbery went to trial. But it's also been a year that saw an increase in racist incidents, a spike in hate crimes against the Asian American and Pacific Islander communities. This year, we dug deeper in our reporting, posing serious questions about race, power, and privilege. And as Chris Ingalls reports, here at King 5, we started with ourselves.
Protests in the streets, anger in the air. The reaction last summer to the death of George Floyd by Minneapolis police.
Well, tonight, a second round of protests across Minneapolis after the death of George Floyd.
The same week of George Floyd's killing in May, by coincidence, King 5 management held a long-planned diversity workshop for station employees. While we usually talk on TV about other people's stories of racial bias, this series of Zoom sessions was about ours.
What were the messages that you received about race?
It was more or less awareness of how the world sees me and the threats that come along with it because I'm a black male.
Jesse Wilson, an account executive in King 5 sales department, grew up in a mostly white world and is now the only African American on the station's sales staff.
There's a lot of different places, a lot of different situations, a lot of different times where people aren't comfortable, and that happens at King 5 as well.
Ryan Beard is a news photographer raised in Florida.
Grew up in a household where my dad basically would explain to me every race there could be, and there always would be like a negative tone to it.
Do you think your father is racist?
Yeah.
What does that make you feel to have to say that?
To say it out loud and to say it is hard, and to actually hear myself say it is hard.
The goal of the training sessions is to open our eyes to bias in how we view other people, whether they're coworkers or the people we choose to put on television.
I think overall, we can be better at telling the stories of people of color in our communities.
Anchor Mimi Jung says we do a poor job of including people of color in stories that aren't about race.
If you go back and look at our air checks, you tell me how many people who are Asian American, people of color in general, but let's talk about Asian Americans who are on TV.
So I'm going to put what Mimi says there to the test, and I'm doing that by watching a week's worth of King 5 newscasts, air checks we call them, to see how many Asians we actually interviewed in our stories during that week. And I'm watching stories from the week before George Floyd died, before there was this big emphasis on race.
I mean, sound bites.
Put you in a different world for a minute.
People who are in authority.
We're really asking for people's voluntary compliance.
Man on the street.
And it's almost kind of an irony that they're going to protest at their own risk.
Anything. Families that are featured, kids, teachers.
We're just not confident that if we had to make the decision today, that they'd be able to, keep the kids safe.
Asians make up about 15% of Seattle's population, but is that reflected in our TV stories?
Okay, this is the end of day one, 6 hours of news on Channel 5, and I don't see one Asian that we've interviewed on this day.
We did better on other days, but at the end of the week, I counted only 11 stories in which Asians were interviewed. In 7 days of news, we mostly featured white people, just as Mimi suspected.
I mean, just look at that. It's like we're not doing enough, and we're not pushing hard enough.
And Mimi, who grew up in Puyallup, knows how it feels to be invisible.
I faced a lot of discrimination growing up as a kid, and I think the message to me from my family and parents and culture was that you didn't speak up, and that if you suffered, you were in somebody else's country.
That's Mimi during King's employee Zoom session last May.
When the kid down the street was trying to feed me dog food as a joke. And I knew they were doing that to make fun of me. In my whole adult life, I had never talked with friends about it, with colleagues about it, and it shocked me to realize in that moment this was the first time I'm talking about my own experiences.
And when Mimi and Ryan and Jesse all spoke from the heart during our training sessions, they opened minds at King 5.
And we at King 5 were not the only ones having tough conversations about race. This year, we heard from people across the Pacific Northwest daring to talk about racism in ways they never had before. One of those people, Steve Ramsey of Renton, whose daughter Caitlin is biracial. Steve told Facing Race reporter Kristen Ayers something he'd never admitted publicly, that he's racist. And he went on a journey with his daughter to try to change.
His name is Steve Ramsey, a 60-year-old white Western Washington man, a husband, a father, and there's one more thing you should know about Steve.
I know that I'm racist and I don't want to be, I don't mean to be, I'm trying not to be.
Late last year, on an episode of King's Facing Race broadcast, he admitted,
I see a group of white kids and I see a group of black kids. I'm going to be more on guard with the black kids because of the way that I was trained, the way I was raised.
Not what you'd expect from a man whose stepdaughter, Caitlin Noble, is biracial. Steve married Caitlin's mother, Alex, and has raised Caitlin since she was a toddler.
Yeah, he's all I know as a father figure.
Mounting unrest over a nationwide fight for racial justice has opened a chasm between Caitlin and her parents.
Honestly, right now, I don't really feel very connected to them.
They've stopped talking, and that's where race educator Karina Hooks comes in.
So what did you make up about yourself having different skin color than the rest of your family?
Over the next few days, we're taking you inside a family's fight to do the hard work of facing race.
I want you to know that if you're not feeling this, like anger, frustration, sadness, guilt, shame, all of that, we're not doing good work. I think about the episode that I watched, and the part that still rings through my ears is, I'm a racist and I want to change. What makes you not the norm is that you're admitting that you're a racist and that you want to change. That's different. It's very rare. I don't know if in my 20 plus years of doing this work, I've ever heard a white person say those words exactly.
I definitely feel shame when I say it, you know what I mean? And I'm not who I want to be for Caitlin.
Caitlin says she's grown up in Renton, largely without her black biological father.
At what point did you realize that you were different in your family?
I would go up to my mom or my aunt and I'd be like, why am I not this color? Why can't I be your color? Like, I wish I was your guys' color.
And did you internalize that? Like it was something wrong with you versus something wrong with them?
Yeah. I always had issues with my own beauty and having self-love.
What do you think's wrong with you? Just be with it.
I'm not good enough.
According to who? I've got you.
To the white man.
Caitlin's struggle made harder by her father's racism.
He makes jokes that are not funny, but he thinks they're funny.
I do say racist stuff. Stuff that I feel bad about now, like I'd make fun of her for like dancing or something, because she doesn't have to get a rhythm. And I'd say stuff like, so that must be the white side of you.
How does it make you feel?
Uncomfortable and angry. It makes me distant.
Sure enough, at the next session, while Caitlin hardly says a word, Karina doesn't mince her words.
There's nothing wrong with being funny. The question is, at whose expense?
Humor is going to always be at somebody's expense, unless it's a knock-knock joke.
If jokes are race-related, class-related, gender-related, like, should not happen. We just have to own it. Like, I'm actually being offensive, and I don't care.
But isn't it the perception of how the person's taking it?
If it has a history of oppression and hurt in this country, I would offer there's nothing funny about it.
So I need to look at why I think it's funny?
Yes.
Okay.
That
makes more sense to me.
And why you think it's okay.
The question of why is going to take Steve back in time to his very first encounter with racism.
Like probably kindergarten. I'm playing with a kid, and that was back when they had white and black drinking fountains. And we both drank. He got beat, and I got yelled at. The difference between him drinking out of that and me was the punishment part. You know what I mean? It was just, he got beat. And I was told, don't ever let black people drink out of a white drinking fountain.
So what did you make up then about black people?
I guess just the whole part about you look different, so you are different.
Karina says that's where it all started. And even now, Steve's experiences still color his relationships with people who are not white, including his daughter.
You heard her mention seeking and desiring self-love. And I will say that jokes will not support that for her.
It's kind of an easy, cheap way to go anyway. You don't really have to think it out. I mean, it's just a really lazy way of getting laughs.
One lesson learned, but Steve has a long way to go.
For Steve, healing from racism means confronting his past. We'll have more on his story in just a few minutes.
Because it just feels like everything is white people suck. You know what I mean? And also, how long is that race going to hold it against me?
Making their voices heard as their community came under attack, a new generation of Asian American activists. A staggering number of missing Native Americans across the country. The effort right here in Washington to bring attention to this hidden crisis.
I have also experienced remarks regarding the China virus, coronavirus directed at me. I feel offended. I feel sad and angry at the same time.
In the first 15 months of the pandemic, more than 9,000 Asian Americans were the victims of hate incidents. Some of the violence caught on video showed black men attacking elderly Asian people. That awakened some historic tensions, but it also brought people together.
It won't be done unless we're willing to organize across racial lines. Blacks, Asians, Native, Latino, progressive whites, all together.
That is Larry Gosset, one of the founding members of Seattle's Gang of Four, a group of 4 non-white activists who forged a brotherhood to bridge the divide between communities. They fought for equality and social justice when it came to issues like education, housing, and health care. Today, Gosset, the last surviving member, is still out on the streets carrying on the gang's legacy. And amid this rise in violence, Asian Americans are making their voices heard through protest. In Seattle, young people are leading the movement. Mimi Jung reports on 2 generations finding their voice.
We are here because enough
is enough.
In March, they showed up by the hundreds in Seattle's Chinatown International District, refusing to stay silent.
Hate the virus!
Outraged over the growing number of violent attacks, racist words, and hateful rhetoric against Asian Americans, people, young and old, came together to say no more.
But I remember seeing like some of our Asian elders in the back trying to keep up with the march. And I was like, oh, are you okay? Like one of them had a walker and I was like, be careful over the cracks, you know, like we'll wait for you. I think it really spoke to how much like we wanted to hear each other and how much we wanted to be together.
20-year-old Madeline Magana is one of the young activists who organized this rally. She had no idea how many people would show up, with elders and high-profile community leaders even thanking her.
Just like walking around and saying like what an honor it is to meet me. And I'm like, no, it's an honor to meet you.
This younger generation of Asian and Pacific Islanders is igniting a fire within others and leading a new wave of activism.
I think the reason why it's oftentimes youth is because they're not working, they have the energy, they're inspired, they're idealistic. But it's happened many times.
UW professor Connie So, who teaches Asian American studies, remembers it was Asian American youth in the 70s who protested against construction of the Kingdome and ended up preserving the Chinatown International District.
The reason why we have the International Community Health Services, Asian Counseling Referral Services, and all these other agencies in the Chinatown International District, in fact, all around South Seattle, it's all because of youth activism, community activism.
The fight against racism and bias is nothing new to Asian Americans. But never before have they experienced this level of violence and hate.
Asian piece of
Oh my God! That started at the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic. Cases across the country include people being pushed, beaten, and stabbed in broad daylight, being blamed for the China virus and the Kung flu. The shootings in Atlanta in March that killed 6 Asian women cracked open the grief and anger. And suddenly, celebrities, athletes, and major companies began speaking out.
I admit I resist speaking about these events or even thinking about them for fear of awakening painful memories.
For Florence Chang, the COO of Multicare, the Atlanta murders were the tipping point. In this letter to her leadership team, she finally told the story of being a 15-year-old immigrant from Taiwan. The first day of school seared into her memory.
Then he put my Chinese name written across the entire chalkboard and said to folks to say, I don't know who this person is. I don't know how to pronounce her name. You can just imagine at that point, the entire class burst into uncontrollable laughter, right? Well, the next day, my parents changed all our names to our English name.
Like so many in the Asian culture, she kept quiet, even into adulthood. She didn't even speak up when hired as a high-level executive. She was told to work with a speech coach to correct her Chinese accent. Now in her 60s, it's the younger generation inspiring her.
They're fighting for their parents. What they want is to let their parents know it is okay to speak up.
And that's why Madeline Magana continues leading this movement. Organizing weekly rallies is just a starting point.
It's inspiring seeing other activists, other youth activists. I wish even younger Asian American voices would speak up. In groups, we can create a very powerful voice.
Facing our country's racist past through pictures, one photographer's mission to uncover a hidden history. Also coming up, another collection of photos exposing the struggles of farm workers decades ago and how these pictures are helping connect families to their past. As a nation, facing racism begins with being honest about our history, a history that still has an impact today. I spoke to a local photographer who's been documenting the remnants of our country's racist past, and he says they're all around us.
The ghosts of segregation are all around us. Wherever we live, we can probably find some trace. We certainly can find history all around us. I want it to, in some way, hearken those spirits and the importance of what transpired.
This former newspaper photographer has given himself one of his most daring assignments to date. Rich Frischman is currently in pursuit of what he sees as painfully alive, America's racism.
It has been an issue for 400 years, and it's still an issue. The idea of segregation exists now in a somewhat different form, but all those Jim Crow laws still reverberate. I know what it was like to be white and middle class and privileged. I also know what it was like to go into restaurants where they didn't serve Jews and where there was hatred towards my own ethnicity. But I can skate under the radar, so I don't know what it's like to be Black or Asian or Hispanic. I don't know what it's like to be gay. I can use my compassionate heart to imagine. So this is the one that started it.
Rich, who lives in Langley, Washington, has spent more than 4 years traveling the country with his camera, hunting down the history. He's on a mission to unmask what's in the built environment by bringing light to what he often sees as hiding in plain sight: racial oppression and the struggle for equality.
Bigotry doesn't know geography.
In Chicago, he captured this mural. The back wall of the bandstand is all that remains of the Sunset Cafe.
Summertime.
Once a vibrant jazz club that was also a haven from segregation.
Count Basie or Ella Fitzgerald or so many, like every legendary jazz performer had been on this stage where now they had racks of knickknacks and stuff. And that history was elusive.
From the Midwest to the Northwest, he captured this at Seattle's Moore Theater, the side door, which used to be the only entrance for Black audience members, right next to this message on display in the summer of 2020.
The marquee had changed after George Floyd's murder and the awareness that really brought to the issue that Black Lives Matter.
Another location that's long been on his list is also in Washington State.
There's many reasons to photograph George in some way.
In 1875, Centralia was founded by George Washington, the other George Washington, a Black man born in Virginia, the son of a slave.
Well, I've been in Centralia dozens of times and never knew that, and I think most people don't.
Quintard Taylor, professor emeritus of history at the University of Washington, does know the story.
George Washington, this Black man, lost his parents early on. He was adopted by a white couple. Eventually, they make their way to Missouri.
And he had decided by trying to live in other towns across the country that if he was going to live in a place that would accept him and that would not have racism, he would have to found it himself. And he did. And sort of he just seemed to be the perfect person to be the center of our office.
Max Vogt, Centralia's mayor pro tem, is also proud of this statue honoring George Washington and wife Mary Jane. At Washington's gravesite, this town pays tribute. And now, so does this photographer.
I hope that people will look at these pictures and realize that history is all around us, good and bad.
Raising awareness about the nation's racist roots is what takes him below ground into the basement of Seattle's Panama Hotel.
I want to find out if these are from internees' homes.
That was the language school.
Owner Jan Johnson is the protector of this place.
I wanted to build something where people would come and learn, right?
Learn about how each suitcase has a story, The luggage ended up here nearly 8 decades ago during World War II, when an executive order led to the relocation and incarceration of Japanese Americans. Families, given just days' notice, came knocking on the hotel's door.
People said, "Can I put my stuff in your basement?" And he said, "Yeah." And then this friend told that one, and this one told that one, and this one, this one, this one. So pretty soon it was just full.
She says many of the families who were forced into concentration camps for years never came back for their belongings. Today, directly above the basement, there's a window providing guests a glimpse. But this is a rare look, to be allowed inside and up close to capture images of the crates covered in dust and filled with memories.
You want to say this is our original sin? Yeah, it's our original sin that continues to haunt us right to this day. It's there. What do we do about it?
We as individuals have a chance to change the future, but we have to witness the present and learn from the past.
And Rich says he wants to spark honest conversations with his project. He hopes his images showing the ghost of segregation will bring understanding, compassion, and eventually change. Who should own national parks? The overwhelming support to return the land to Native American tribes. Getting to the root of racism, we continue with part 2 of Steve's story as he confronts his biases head on. Right now, there are thousands of missing Native Americans across our country. But for a long time, what has been a crisis on reservations has been widely ignored. We traveled to eastern Washington, home to the highest number of documented cases in the state.
I live in the community of White Swan, which is in the rural, remote community of the Acoma Reservation. And so I was preparing for the powwow.
This is where happy memories surround a family.
That was about 50 years ago. That's all I'm going to say.
But also some haunting ones.
I think about the strength of who she was and just her free will about her.
Patsy Whitefoot is still waiting for the phone to ring, waiting for any word about what happened to Daisy Mae Heath.
She left one day, and so, I just thought, well, she probably be in the mountains because it was toward the end of summer, or she could have gone hunting.
But 29-year-old Daisy Mae, their youngest sister, never came home. In the fall of 1987, she was reported missing, and more than 30 years later, it is still their greatest mystery.
There's just no evidence, of where she may be.
She says her sister's story is just one of the many examples of a crisis of Indigenous people missing or murdered, with poor data collection only contributing to the mounting number of cold cases.
It's still like this black hole that exists out there. And you begin to question, well, why am I still here when everybody else is gone around you?
It's painful for Patsy, who's lost not only family, but friends too. She finds herself in a club no one wants to join, the loved ones left grieving.
We come together and we know what each other is going through. And I think about that, and we shouldn't have to be together, but we are.
Patsy and others see racism as a reason why historically this crisis has largely been ignored and the data not properly collected. According to the numbers the Washington State Patrol does have, Native Americans are disproportionately represented, making up about 2% of the state's population, but accounting for nearly 6% of active missing persons reports.
Just hearing how broken the system was, it's devastating.
State Representative Gina Mossbrucker is working to change that.
2 bills later, we're on our 3rd now, fixing the issue as much as possible and trying to bring as much awareness as possible.
She says gathering an accurate count of how many are missing is critical.
You talk about wanting to get a number, but I guess one of the big problems is you go and you look at the data that the state currently has, and they've misidentified races, and they can't really give you a solid number yet.
You're right, we don't have a number, and we're across the nation now working really hard. Even federal government's working hard to help us now to make sure we get that fixed.
I went through something, and I'm not going to be the last to go through it, unfortunately.
George Lee Jr., a member of Yakima Nation and an Air Force and Army veteran, is working to pick up the pieces after losing not one, but two loved ones. In 2003, his mother, Sandra Lee Simiskin, was found shot and killed in Seattle, a case that remains unsolved. 16 years later, another tragedy. This time, his missing cousin, 25-year-old Alilia Minthorn, was found shot and killed on the Yakima Indian Reservation. In her case, a man was arrested and convicted.
It was a really big shock, and it hurt. It hurt a lot.
It's why he's raising awareness now about the missing, a list that's long, and here, the message is clear. No more stolen sisters.
We have so many resources that are available that can help aid and bring together a very swift and powerful search party. But we won't take those steps. And that's the most painful part.
In recent years, there's been national recognition with the passage of bills aiming to improve the federal response. And at the state level,
we still have a past that we need to catch up with.
Patty Gosh is one of 2 Washington State Patrol tribal liaisons hired in 2019 to focus on missing Indigenous persons cases.
The list goes back how long?
Janice Hannigan is our first one from 1971.
Here, they say priorities include posting an updated list of the missing twice a month, changing inaccurate racial identifiers, and working closely between Native communities and government organizations.
We need to remember these are people, these are communities that are hurting. These are families that need to have some closure. These are victims that need to come home.
I like this one.
And for Patsy and her family, the sad statistics are much more than that. Behind the numbers are the faces, at times of friends, and always of a sister, Daisy May, someone they'll never stop fighting for. The frustration fuels her.
Violence continues to go on in our communities, and we have to continue to keep moving forward.
So much so that she's become a leader in a movement, using her voice on podcasts and at podiums to make sure these cases are seen and investigated. And today, she has hope.
It's an answer to a prayer. It's an answer to a prayer that this can be prevented and this can be avoided for my great-grandchildren.
Should national parks be given to Native American tribes? Members have used the land for generations. King 5's Drew Mickelson explores the idea that's gaining ground.
Creating a national park system has been called America's best idea. Mount Rainier is the 5th oldest national park. But local tribes say they have a much better idea. Turn the property over to them. The Nisqually Glacier near the summit of Mount Rainier is the source of the Nisqually River, the heart and soul of the Nisqually tribe, used by members for generations, just like they used Mount Rainier for hunting and gathering. The Nisqually tribe says their history is not being honored within the national park today.
We come from fighters, and the fighters fought for the treaty right, fought for the fishing right, and will continue to fight for the fish here in this river as Nisqually, but also to fight for that, not land acknowledgement, but land back. Living cultures.
This summer, Mount Rainier National Park got a new superintendent who says he is planning on meeting with tribes to find better ways to celebrate both the past and the future. There are already plans in the works to expand some of the historical exhibits within Mount Rainier's property. The Nisqually tribe has not made any formal requests for the property. At this point, it's just an idea they are pursuing.
In an exclusive King 5 poll, we asked 650 adults across the state if national park lands should be returned to tribes as reparations. The largest response was yes, with 43%. 32% said no, and 25% of those asked said they were not sure. Hidden, buried, and erased. For centuries, the rich history of Native Americans has been largely left out of history books. We wanted the true stories from the indigenous communities who know it best, from the facts of the first Thanksgiving to the dark history of indigenous boarding schools. Here's a glimpse of what we found out.
Plymouth Rock, it's supposed to symbolize where the Pilgrims stepped off the Mayflower.
You may think you know the story of the first Thanksgiving, but the Facing Race team traveled to Plymouth Rock to meet the descendants of the indigenous tribe that met the Pilgrims here 4 centuries ago. And they told us the real story of how Native Americans were erased from the narrative.
I think it's ludicrous. We've been disregarded and treated like our part in this history doesn't matter. They came and took our land in order to start a colony here, and that's just the truth of it.
Another piece of buried history our Facing Race team reported on, the tragic legacy of Indigenous boarding schools. The U.S. and Canadian governments established them in the 19th century as a way to strip Indigenous children of their Native identities. Historic films show groups of Indigenous school children forced to forget their cultures and languages. Their traditional songs replaced by humiliating ones. Many children died and were buried at the boarding schools. At Chemawa Indian School in Salem, Oregon, there's a burial ground where the children still lie.
They were somebody's child. They were killed. These children were stolen. They lie right here.
And we met scholars working to try to return their remains to their families.
So we're hopeful that some of this research can help narrow down what are probably unmarked graves. Makes me feel sad and also, I guess, honestly, just a little bit angry that more wasn't done.
Coming up, a look into the past through these pictures. Farm workers in the fields of Yakima County, a new effort to put names to these faces.
What do you feel like your legacy is?
Well, hopefully it is one of organizing and, getting people to become activists because I think everybody needs to be an activist.
Dolores Huerta, a woman of color in a man's world and still making history to this day. We spoke to Huerta during Hispanic Heritage Month. She's one of the most influential civil rights leaders of the 20th century and now 91 years old. Her activism has spanned more than 6 decades. She became a household name when she led negotiations for the United Farm Workers Union along with Cesar Chavez. It was during those years that Huerta coined a phrase that would take on a life of its own.
Sí, se puede.
A step back in history to the 1960s in the Yakima Valley. Farm workers were fighting for a better life, labored under dire conditions to feed the country. Their stories were documented by the Seattle photographer who took these pictures. Now a new mission, putting names to these faces.
I always used to refer to him as our secret weapon.
There's nothing quite like reconnecting with old friends.
That was his name, Secret Weapon Nash.
Especially when that friend is documentary photographer Erwin Nash.
I'm going to be picking him up. There he is right there. Hi, Erwin.
Retired Judge Michael Fox is on a mission to help Nash's photos become much more than memories.
Have you taken a look at the entire collection that's online?
Well, I haven't looked at all 11,000, but I've looked at a whole bunch of them.
Also committed to that cause is Lupe Gamboa.
We hadn't seen each other for at least 40, 45 years.
A longtime farm worker activist.
And we hit it off as if we'd seen each other yesterday. He was a kid picketing on campus when I first met him.
The pictures that brought them together in the first place are the reason for this reunion.
Zach Chavez is very quiet and humble.
It's unfinished work.
The work began in the 60s and 70s in the Yakima Valley.
And this kid was sitting in what was initially a closet they made a shower out of.
Nash set out to shine light on labor camp living conditions for farm workers.
First grade education, 31 years old, and she hoped someday they could have a little grocery store. I was crying inside when I heard it because I knew it wouldn't happen.
Many were Hispanic and some came from Mexico, eager to work. What they found were jobs harvesting hops, making as little as $1.25 an hour.
This was taken in the middle of the night.
To this very day, he remembers the people in his pictures.
From what I saw, they weren't treated like human beings. They were treated like tools, almost like animals to help in the crops.
He says race and greed were among the reasons why.
It's very disturbing. People shouldn't be treated that way.
Nash decided to do something about it. Teaming up with Fox and Gamboa, the trio took action to help farm workers organize, and at times that meant sneaking into labor camps.
They're threatening to put all of us in jail if we don't leave within 5 minutes.
We were arrested in the late afternoon. They took us down, booked us, and took our pictures.
Once they were released, they went right back.
We took that picture with the two of us giving the power handshake over the no trespassing sign. That's one of my most treasured possessions.
I just love it. They look like they're having so much fun. They just broke the law.
Dr. Lippy Turner-Rahman says it's one of the thousands of photos in Nash's collection that's now owned by Washington State University.
We're on the WSU Pullman campus, Herald Library.
In the depths of this library is where the collection sat for many years before WSU put about 100 of the photos online.
We ended up stumbling on the Irwin Nash photography collection.
Laura Solis and her partner, Mike Fong, made the discovery while doing an ancestry search.
You did find a relative?
Yes.
Who did you find?
Elisa Elizondo. I didn't know at the time I saw her photograph. She's my great aunt.
She was a single mother who worked in the fields from dawn until dusk.
It meant something to my cousin Adam, who wrote this lovely tribute to her. He said, "What kind of man would I be if I did not get up every day to provide for my family? Because of her, I will always value the little things in life that she worked so hard for every early morning and long hot day. I love you, Grandma Elisa Elizondo, and thank you for showing me the way." I can never read that and not choke up. Yeah, I recognize my own family and what he said. I recognize the sacrifices. They did that for us. And, and I think other people have that story too.
It's the untold stories coming to the surface, and WSU wants to hear more.
We started up a conversation about what would it take to get some of these digitized and online.
It took money, with the university securing a grant and some private fundraising. Now the collection is up, and the hope is that more people in these pictures will be identified.
It is sort of a race against time to get those memories, those stories.
Soon on campus, some of the images will be on display.
The strength of the community is in those photographs.
For Laura, it's about her community finally being seen thanks to Nash's photos.
This isn't just an issue that's in the past. I think it's an issue that's relevant now.
In a sense, it's improved greatly. Farm workers almost have equal protection under the law because of the efforts of people like Irwin and Michael and myself bringing attention to the issue and organizing and striking.
These friends are proud of the mission they started more than 50 years ago.
It really changed my whole perspective on life, where I fit into a social struggle, and one of the most meaningful things in my life.
Now they want to see their work have a lasting impact.
To get some political action on behalf of the people who were being mistreated. That's why I did it. You hope to help a little bit.
If you want to take a closer look at some of the pictures to see if you can identify anyone, check out our story on king5.com/facingrace.
I'm going to tell you a couple things that may be hard to hear.
A father confronts the realization that he is racist. The tough conversation with his biracial daughter continues right after the break.
I know that I'm racist and I don't want to be. I don't mean to be. I'm trying not to be.
Before we go, we started this hour with the journey of Steve, the man from Renton who admitted to himself and us he's racist. He's been trying to make things right with his daughter, who's half black. They allowed Kristen Ayers to come with them as they met with a counselor. Tonight, Steve asked a question we've heard many other white people ask as we've explored issues around race over the past several months. Basically, how long will white Americans be blamed for racism?
I know that I'm racist and I don't want to be. I don't mean to be. I'm trying not to be.
Steve Ramey is coming to terms with what it means to be racist and how it's hurting his family, including his biracial daughter, Caitlin Noble. For months, we've been following Steve.
I do say racist stuff. A lot of it's out of humor.
He didn't realize how much his jokes were hurting Caitlin.
How does it make you feel?
Uncomfortable and angry.
But with the help of local race educator Karina Hooks,
I would offer there's nothing funny about it.
Steve has just made progress.
So I need to look at why I think it's funny?
Yes.
Okay.
Why,
that makes more sense to me.
and why you think it's okay.
Steve thought it would be relatively easy to stop being racist.
I'm going to tell you a couple things that may be hard to hear.
He's about to learn that racism doesn't stop with telling off-color jokes. And tonight, he pushes back.
Because it just feels like everything is white people suck.
Over hours of counseling Steve and Caitlin, Karina Hooks is starting to get to the root of their race issues. For Caitlin, it's discovering her identity as a Black woman raised by white parents.
How does she get to step into her beauty and her excellence and find her voice and still hold on to the relationship she values so dearly with her family?
It's hard to do when her own dad doesn't get it.
He doesn't, about the he doesn't see color kind of thing.
We all see color, unless we're colorblind.
I do see the color and stuff. I guess when I'm saying that I don't see colors, I'm not judging a person by their color.
But you understand that people are judged by their color.
Yes.
Can I explain?
Caitlin has been quiet, but now she wants to lay out what's wrong with her dad not seeing her color.
It means that if you don't see then you don't see our experiences and what we go through as a colored person. Meaning you don't see our the stuff we go through based on our color that we go through just because of our color.
What are some of the identities that you hold?
Okay, white.
4 identities he lists: he's white, he's male, he's a father, and he's over 60.
But if you were to get rid of 3 of them, which 3 would it be?
I ain't getting rid of white. That don't make sense. I wouldn't want to give up the white part because I don't want to be treated the way that white people treat people.
With Steve, it's interesting because there is kind of, I don't understand, help me understand. And at the same time, when I ask a question like, what part of your identity would you give up? And he responded, well, I would like to give up being a white man, but I know the consequences. What he does know is that it's better to be white than it is to be Black in this country.
For the first time, Steve is forced to face what that will mean for Caitlin.
When Caitlin steps out of the home into the world, she is judged based on her color. And there are some assumptions that people will make just by the color of her skin. If I make a judgment based on what I've been conditioned to know, we've been taught that then that must mean we're a bad person. Versus saying, I've been conditioned to believe like Black is bad. I've been conditioned to believe that Black people should just work harder. And so now that I know I've been conditioned in that way, let me work to counteract that narrative.
When you put it in that angle, yes, every person that walks up, we're going to judge if they're safe or they're not.
People all the time will say, I don't see color, but I don't go over there where the Black people are. This is a contradiction, right?
So it feels like that now that you've said it that way, that I'm using that as an excuse to be racist, I guess, because it just feels like everything is white people suck. You know what I mean? I can't be alone in thinking that.
You're not.
So how long do I got to feel guilty for how my ancestors treated a whole race of people? You know what I mean? And then also, how long is that race going to hold it against me?
I'm not a guilt, shame, blame type of practitioner. So I would say guilt and shame and all of that does nothing to forward our humanity or our work in this area. I'm just going to reframe your question even though it was different. Okay. How long am I responsible for what I inherited? And I would say that until your daughter is able to have equitable access to housing, health care, education, I will say in your lifetime the work will not be done.
Nope.
I would say in your lifetime the work will not be done. But what we can commit to is an active practice daily that makes sure that your daughter, Caitlin, and the Caitlins of the world are able to be seen deeper than the color of one's skin.
That isn't the end of Steve and Caitlin's journey. They're ready to start having the difficult conversations about race on their own, but it won't exactly be easy.
Just sitting there eating in the kitchen or something, and I went, "So how's it feel to be black?" She goes, "Shut up."
I said, "Shut up."
I'm not supposed to ask that.
Our Facing Race team is dedicated to bringing you stories just like you've seen over the last hour. If you have any story ideas, email us at race@king5.com. Have a good evening.